Stories tend to have characters, whether they be human, humanoid, animal, vegetable, mineral, and everything else. You can probably count on something that is some kind of someone being the main focus. In the modern day, gaming as a medium is as inseparable from iconic main characters as any other medium. It's chock full of recognizable protagonists that we relate to, are inspired by, or just can't imagine a landscape without. For every Miles Morales, Xena, and Totoro, there's a Madeline, Kratos, and Sonic with just as much or more of a media footprint. But unlike film, TV, print, and the like, video games are probably the one form that had the most adaptations needed to join the crowd as they are today. Due to tech limitations and a general uncertainty as to what video games were really supposed to be, it took a couple decades of experimentation before we even had 1. A game with its own solid, unique idea just for fun, thank you Steve Russell for Space War, and 2. Our first game with a real narrative to it, thank you Mabel Addis for the Sumerian game. The ripple effect of these discoveries eventually led to a bold new world of games where not only were you taken away by breathtaking virtual worlds, but also a finely crafted narrative structure centered around protagonists like this. Listen, this was a huge deal at the time, and one gaming boom, industry crash, and resuscitation later, we ended up in the mid-80s with a style of video game more akin to what we know today. From there, the plotlines, fully formed worlds, and characters kept advancing and multiplying. Never again would we have to look at a single basic shape in a minimalist world and try to assign human emotion to it.
Thomas was alone. Wow, a weird first thought to have.
Well, just because we don't have to doesn't mean that we can't. Thomas Was Alone is a puzzle platformer first released as a free Flash game in 2010 before being expanded into the current fully developed Unity-powered version in 2012. It was pretty much created solo by designer Mike Bithell, with basically just the narration and soundtrack being completed with some help. The game was developed on the side during his off hours from working at Bossa Studio. In it, the player takes on the role of various AI, represented as squares and rectangles, gaining sentience and attempting to explore the confines of their computer system. The programs try to accomplish this through the various quirks that each of them have and the ways that they can support each other. For instance, the eponymous red rectangle Thomas is an all-around average jumper, but with great height to stack on top of. The purple square Claire is resistant to water damage, but with low jumping ability, and the yellow rectangle John can get to very high places, but can't fit into small gaps, and so on. Each level involves toggling between whichever characters are currently present in order to get everyone to their respective endpoints. This involves classic Puzzplat tasks like avoiding spikes, pitfalls, and goop, hitting buttons, and jumping. Lots and lots of jumping. There's also a bit of humbling backtracking you may encounter when you realize way too late that you've put one character too close to the endpoint before they were done being useful to everyone else. Wait, oh my god. Alright, hang on John, we need you back here because Chris can't pull it together. As you progress through the game, new shapes are introduced and the solutions get more complex as the possibilities for how characters can interact grows and the landscapes become more threatening. But to me, there aren't any puzzles that ever come off as convoluted enough to ruin the experience or cause the better part of a day to be wasted. On the contrary, the game can be completed in only a few hours, with the average being roughly 3 to 4 hours for a new player. It's a nice little series of puzzles, but the major strength of Thomas Was Alone lies in its story and characterization. Every level is accompanied with charming narrations that let the player in on who each character is and what everyone is thinking.
Was she more the lone Avenger type? If you'd like that. The sole hero in a world of rectangles and conveniently placed pools of toxic water.
The larger chapters also contain testimonials from the employees at the corporation that the game exists in, and what goes on in the real world as the AIs advance through cyberspace. At first it just feels kind of silly and cute, like, haha, yeah, okay narrator guy, this rectangle's name is Thomas, that's funny. But it quickly becomes more clear that this is actually a genuine story being presented with stunning prose. It still has some humor to it, but it's also consistently beautiful and dramatic. As I played, the simplicity of each shape began to fade away and I truly felt connected to each of them as individuals. I felt it in my heart when Claire sees herself as a superhero for the first time after hopping into the water and surviving, or when James comes to terms with how others have treated him in the past after Thomas shows him kindness.
Why did Thomas even want to spend time with James? Was he not repulsed by his weird colour?
And I also felt such true disdain exactly when the game wanted me to.
Chris stared at Thomas with pure hatred.
Chris, man, why are you such a...
Happy at their situation.
And I also just want to take a moment to say that the glitchy ambient soundtrack really shines as well and helps elevate the weight of each event perfectly. I'll try not to give away too much more of the story here for anyone who hasn't played it yet, but there's really so much wonder and arcs that fit comfortably into such a relatively small runtime. This tiny rectangle named Sarah is one of my favorite characters of all time because of the incredible writing of this game. The game was a huge hit with players and critics alike, and was brought up in a lot of ongoing conversations about the state of indie game development and the concepts of an art game at the time. I'm not sure if it might lose some of its impact if you play it for the first time today without the cultural context, although I must admit that there are unfortunate moments where the game really reminds you exactly when it came out. But I definitely still had some fun replaying it for this video, and though it wasn't completely the first of its kind, it did prove to be pretty influential in the aesthetic sensibilities of similar games moving forward because of how well it applied its story and character concepts. Though a few years prior is where we find our next game, and that would be that game company's Flower. In between making a splash on the indie scene as a group of college students with Cloud, and eventually creating the international hit Journey, the small team at that game company stirred up interest and discussion with their 2009 title, Flower. And also they made a cool game called Flow, but I'm sorry Flo, we're not talking about you today. In Flower, you play as the wind in the dreams of flowers on a windowsill, which is somehow not just an out of context of Monsters and Men lyric, but a real game description. You cascade through various environments, blooming flowers, and picking up petals along the way as you bring beauty and healing to the world around you. Even in 2025, the stylization of this game makes the visuals remain just as breathtaking as when it first came out. The different types of fields and flower species you bloom surround you with incredible pools of vibrant color. Vincent Diamante also creates a wonderful, whimsical soundtrack enhanced by extra notes being played with every petal you pick up. There are certain groups of flowers you have to bloom in each zone to open up new areas and progress through each of the stages until you eventually reach these swirling end zones. You don't have to get every petal, but if you're like me, you may feel a self-inflicted pressure to do so that breaks the serenity of the game every now and then.
No, it's fine, it doesn't bother me, it bothers me a lot.
Besides that, it is overall a relaxing, lightly puzzling trip through nature filled with peace and beauty. That is, of course, until it isn't. In Dream 4, a little past halfway through the game, two important things are introduced. The first thing is the Glow Flower ability, which serves as the main puzzle mechanic of the stage. It grants you the power to illuminate sections of landscape that have been darkened by the setting sun. You maneuver through different objectives, leaving a pleasant blue brightness behind you, until the second important thing is introduced: a sense of dread. In the final stretch of Dream 4, the bulbs that playfully guide your way suddenly burst, the bouncing orchestra turns cold and grim, and as you make your way to the end of the stage, you find yourself surrounded by faulty wiring, industrial wreckage, and most importantly, darkness with no flowers. The next stage raises this atmosphere by adding collapsed urban infrastructure and discordant notes when picking up petals to replace the previously fluttery ones. Most dramatically, a new consequence also shows up: the possibility of getting hurt. You still have to power through and bring healing to the land like you did before, but the inclusion of environmental hazards essentially makes Dream 5 a tense, claustrophobic stealth mission, and after almost 4 full levels of whimsy, the change definitely hits. Even when you light up the power lines to make them safe to pass through, there's still this foreboding sense of uncertainty. Is this actually helping? Will the beauty and freedom of the early stages be possible again? Yep. Sure will, because in the next and final dream, you gain your powers back and your glow flower ability is like supercharged and it's really cool, and you take out all the wreckage like pow, bragada, bam, bam, bam. And after having to slowly and methodically creep through everything in the previous dream, this becomes one of the most satisfying sequences that I've had in a game to this day. The colors pop brighter than they have before, you get the chance to zoom around higher and faster than ever, and something I really enjoy thematically is that you're not just removing the signs of human existence, but more so joining them with nature in harmonious ways. The final ascent bashing through a tenacious tower trying in vain to push you back is truly an empowering end to the story. Though much of the game was based aesthetically on director Genova Chen's move from the cityscapes of Shanghai to the greener areas of California, both he and that game company's co-founder Kelly Santiago wanted Flower to be more intentionally open-ended. This was to go along with the studio's game development method of emotional impact as a center of game design.
With that game company, we start our ideas with an emotion of how we want the player to feel, and then we bring in the engine, the art direction, the music, and everything, and the interaction, what the player's doing in the game together.
I think that's pretty neat. Also, this game has playable credits. That is forever a plus for me. Can we please have more games do this again? At this point, this video is essentially a focus on notable art games in addition to the original peculiar protagonist angle. This makes sense because if you're going for a unique or avant-garde approach to the central character of a story, it tends to alter the fundamental ways the entire project is presented. You made the very specific choice for your main character to be the wind or a series of rectangles, so now the setting and plot probably end up pretty artsy in order for that choice to make narrative sense. But the opposite can be true as well. Deciding to be non-specific with your protagonist can also take things in a pretty artsy direction, especially if it's non-specific to the point that your main character could be everything.
Such a good segue, fuck yeah.
In 2017, one of the art games of all time was released to the world. That game is called Everything. It was designed by artist David O'Reilly with some additional programming by Damien Quartz. But apparently there was a third person I saw referenced sometimes in articles, but the articles also never actually named them for some reason, so if you know the third person who helped make Everything, let me know. However, much like with Mike and Thomas Was Alone, Everything was largely a passion project by David. His first foray into game design was Mountain, a Zen game largely comprised of kinda just watching what happens to a mountain for a while. It was intended to be something you run in the background while you do other stuff on your computer and check in on it every now and then. And then his very next game jumped from interacting with nothing to interacting with as many things as possible. I respect the chaos, honestly. Although chaos probably isn't the reputation the game has built among casual observers.
We have this hostility to the external world because of the superstition, the myth, the absolutely unfounded theory.
What Everything as a game is about is a little complicated, so first it's easier to just say what it literally is. Everything is a game where you explore various landscapes and hop between controlling almost everything around you. The basic functions for doing this are directly transferring consciousness to something that's visible, or choosing to ascend or descend into a larger or smaller plane of existence, which usually results with you inhabiting a random thing in that plane. These are the planes ranging from subatomic to galactic, and all the stuff that exists in those planes, over 1,300 individual things total, is your playground. The game starts you with a random animal on what would be considered the normal plane from a human perspective and teaches you about the different ways to control a thing. This is stuff like singing, dancing, and forming groups and such. There's also the option that unlocks, which allows you to pick a specific thing to change into that you've previously been, even if it's not around you. This is probably what I spend most of my time doing because it scales the object to the current plane you're in, which definitely upgrades the chaos factor. As you wander, there are occasionally other things you can talk with, and then there's what I'd say is the central theme to the game, which is listening to different snippets of British-American philosopher Alan Watts discussing the greater idea of the human being as a thing.
Net is something regular, and I can number the holes in a net. So many holes up, so many holes across.
If you like Alan Watts, or just really vibe with the aesthetic of listening to philosophy while flowing through existence, this is probably the perfect game for you. If you think these kinds of speeches are a bit pretentious, you have the option to not activate them. Actually, Alan, I just want to be a wolf right now. You also don't have to listen to other objects offer personal testimonials either. Actually, you have the option to not do anything. There's an autoplay function you can turn on that makes the game play itself when you leave it idle for a few seconds. And it can fully complete itself when it's in this mode if you turn on the settings for it. So what's the point of playing it at all? Well, David O'Reilly has been notoriously avoidant about that in interviews.
So how do you explain the game?
I don't explain it.
You don't explain it?
No, I don't think it's my job to explain it at all. I think I can describe it.
So how do you describe it?
That's a hard one too.
Although he does sometimes offer harder answers about elements of the game, the real overall meaning, you guessed it, is generally left up to the player. But it seems that narrative and gameplay vagueness at large ended up being very divisive on both a critic and audience level. Personally, I had some fun with the game. It's dealing with some heavy artsy ideas, but there's also enough silliness mixed in there where it rarely feels like it's taking itself too seriously. I definitely felt that deep megalophobic uneasiness of being an entire galaxy after being a mere molecule so recently before. I felt chills when hearing the unsettling subatomic sound effects. But then having it immediately turn to laughter when I became a cosmic bus stop seconds later. It was neat, though I did play the game for a relatively short amount of time before feeling like I had my fill. I feel that was the experience for a lot of people, but if you're a gamer that enjoys collectibles, this is probably the best game possible. Regardless of complaints, I'm glad game experiments like this exist, if just for the interesting conversations they can ignite. If you've played everything, let me know which camp you fall into. And while you're at it, tell me how you feel about Flower and Thomas Was Alone, or tell me your other favorite game with a peculiar protagonist that I should check out. I've got links to support me in the description, as well as other stuff that has nothing to do with me that I just thought you might find cool. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good day.